So for this week's painting, I decided to go back to the studio. The last couple of weeks I've been doing plein air practice attempts. They are available to watch on YouTube, so if you want to check those out first, then go ahead. But I decided that I wanted to do today's painting indoor from a photograph because I felt like there were some things I needed to work on before I got back outside and started plein air painting again. I've been working on loosening up my style for a really long time because I kind of like the painterly look of paintings. I don't want them to be hyper realistic. I do like a slightly looser feel, and that's something I thought plein air painting would help me with. However, I feel like I got a little bit lazy with my plein air paintings. I needed to be faster because the light was changing and because I felt a bit self-conscious painting outside. But I maybe rushed through the process a little bit, and I don't think I took as much care as I should have done with the painting. So I decided that I would try and go for a more detailed piece this time because I thought, you know, if you're doing detail, you have to slow down a little bit, and maybe that would be helpful and I would actually think about what I was doing instead of just throwing paint on there and hoping for the best. I've actually attempted this painting once before because I really like the reference, but it turned out quite dark, and although I did like the painting, the whole atmosphere in it is fairly dark and it's difficult to see unless you're in a bright sunlit area, and so I wanted to bear that in mind this time and try and make it a little bit lighter. I also decided to approach this in a slightly different way, so I've been painting alla prima and just doing everything in one go, and I do enjoy that, but this time I thought I would break it down and do it over several days. So I started out with a detailed block-in, and that's what we're watching right now. To be honest, I think this might be my favourite part of the painting before I got a little bit bogged down in the detail. I think this worked quite well, and although there are definitely things that I would do differently if I were to do it again, I do like the simplicity of this first attempt. I was trying to be a bit more thoughtful this time and think about why I was putting the paint down instead of just throwing it on there and just going from there. So I tried to keep the colours fairly desaturated in the background with a little bit more of a blue tinge to them, and then get slightly more yellow as I move further forward. Again, that's definitely something that I could improve on, but it was nice just having the time to practice it this time and just see how it turned out. I wanted the block-in to be a bit more detailed than I usually would go for, because sometimes I do a very loose block-in and then that causes me problems later down the line because I feel like I've already established a weird looking painting and then I'm fighting it the whole way. I thought if I put in a bit more effort here and try and do a nice painting from the block-in stage, then adding that detail over the top should hopefully, in theory, be a slightly easier task. I actually found that I enjoyed this methodical approach more than I thought I would do. I sometimes find detail a little bit tedious, and so I didn't think that I would enjoy this so much, but it was actually quite nice just sitting and adding a layer at a time, thinking about what colours I wanted in there and trying to get a nice mix, blending things together, and just working at it one stage at a time was actually very rewarding, and I enjoyed this part of the process. Although I enjoyed the block-in, there were some areas that I felt I could improve on next time, and the most obvious for me is that the tone across the whole piece is very similar. I really wanted the foreground to pop and to have more saturation and a bit more yellow in the greens, and I didn't really achieve that in the block-in phase, so I felt like I had to overcompensate for that when I was going over it with more detail. So if I did it again, I would just be a little bit more careful about making sure the colours were right to begin with, so I wasn't fighting against it the whole time. I took this photo in one of my favourite places to visit, so it's always in the back of my mind that I really want to do this place justice because it's so beautiful in real life, and I think that's probably why I'm a little bit hard on myself when it comes to this painting. I left the painting to dry for a couple of days and then I came back to do the next layer over the top. This is really quite new to me because usually I do it in one sitting, but I actually really enjoyed this part, and although it didn't turn out completely as I had in mind, I did like the process and it was nice layering the paint on top of what was already there. One of the things that I found I liked about this process and that was really helpful for me was the fact that having a day or so break in between each sitting actually gave me time to consider the painting and what I'd done so far and to see whether I liked the direction it was going in or not. And usually I don't really get chance to do that. Normally I do everything all in one go and I rarely step back and take a look at it and think about what I could do to improve it until the end, and then it's too late. But this way of painting was really great because I got that chance to take a step back, have a look at what was working well and what wasn't going so great, and then try and address that in the next day's painting. One of the things I think I would do differently next time would be to work on a slightly larger scale, and that is not normal for me. Usually I enjoy working on a small scale and I tend to go for smaller canvases. An 8x10 inch canvas is actually pretty big for me. I like doing really miniature paintings, so to want to do this on a larger scale is unusual. However, I think because of the amount of detail I was trying to get into here, sometimes it got a little on the messy side, and I think if I had a larger canvas, I wouldn't be so cluttered. It did feel like I was trying to fit in a lot of information into a small area. And in some places it worked. I think I got a nice balance in the background hills there, and as we move forward, I think that works pretty well. There's a nice little path that's forming next to those two bushes on the right hand side, and I thought that was very sweet and I liked adding that in. But because I'd got that much detail in the midground, I think I needed to up the detail in the foreground, and as a result, the painting seems a little bit unbalanced, but I'll let you watch it and see what you think at the end. I tried to alternate colours on the hillside there rather than doing it all in just one block of colour, just to add a little bit of interest. I didn't want the colours to contrast too much because I thought that would be too distracting, but I did want there to be a variety to indicate all the different types of grass that's growing up on the hillside there. I liked adding in these little tracks, but again, I feel like if I had a larger canvas, this might have worked a little better, and I could have put a bit more detail around the outside. Every time I added a new feature like this, it did feel like I was kind of tipping it over the edge a little bit, so maybe working on a larger scale next time, I'll be able to get away with more of these details. I enjoyed adding these two lovely cows in the background. I think I might need to move them to make the composition work a little better, but it was nice having that going on so that you could see that this was an area where there's quite a lot of livestock, and it's not just this one cow by itself, but it's actually a story about the landscape rather than just a portrait of a cow. I struggled a little bit with the cow in the foreground. You will see shortly that the head disappears while I have to paint it again in the right position. I felt like after 3 days of painting, I needed to get the face in the right place. I think one of the reasons I struggled so much with it is that I needed to add a bit more detail into this cow to really help it sit in the landscape I'd created. Because there's so much going on in the background, I think the cow needed a bit more rendering, but because this is only 8x10 inches, it was really small, and I felt like if I added too much detail, then it would just look cluttered. So again, a larger canvas size would probably have helped with balancing that out a little bit. I think the same goes for the foreground as well, and if I did it again, I would include a little bit more detail in the grasses and some of the pebbles and the mud and the flowers in the foreground so that they were a lot more detailed in comparison to what's going on behind the cow. I didn't do too much more to the painting after this. I added a little bit more detail in the foreground, and then I decided to call it a day because I felt like I was at the stage where I was about to ruin it if I did any more. Alright, so here is the finished painting, and here is the painting that I did the first time around, just for comparison. That's the slightly looser feel, and it's a little bit darker, that painting. And here is the one we have finished today. Now I know I said during this video, I listed a lot of things that I would change. It doesn't mean that I didn't enjoy this process or I don't like things about it, because there's definitely some areas I like. This background here I really enjoy, and I think if I just kind of cut the painting in half, I'd be really happy with that. I like the blue distant hills, I like this sunlit slope, the clouds are great, I love this tiny little path, I think that's so cute, and the cow and the tiny cows going around the corner, so that I'm really happy with. And the foreground isn't bad either, it's just I feel like I could do it better. And that's great because it gives me a direction to go in and it gives me something to focus on next time. I like these cows, but I think maybe I'd move them to improve the composition. I'd make this slightly less messy. I think there's a lot of stuff going on in there and it's a bit distracting. And I'd probably refine some of the foreground detail just to make it a little better, to read a little better, so it sits well with this detailed background. But all in all, I am happy with this attempt, and until next time.